I would look from the defense table and I would see these 6 lawyers in suits in front of a judge talking about chickens. And I thought, no matter what, we've come so far. Ethan and Jax are just, as you said, they're a microcosm of all the chickens that are out there and all the chickens that are going to be bred in the next years. And they represent them. But you and I, we represent Ethan and Jax, and we're humans, and we can get inside a court of law and start speaking for these chickens.
Welcome, friends, to the Switch4Good podcast. I am especially excited for today because I get to interview one of my heroes. And my hero list is pretty short. My podcast partner, your favorite podcaster, Alexandra. So I want to set the scene for you from which we will be springboarding from today. So bear with me. Here we go. On Friday, March 17th, after nearly 6 hours of deliberation, 2 animal rights activists facing misdemeanor theft charges were acquitted by a California jury. The alleged crime, which the activists freely admitted to, involved taking 2 sick, slaughter-bound chickens from Foster Farms, one of the biggest poultry companies in the United States. Prosecutors called it stealing, but the defendants, Alicia Santurio and Alexandra Paul, called it a rescue. Alicia and Alexandra had taken the chickens from a truck outside of Foster Farms slaughterhouse in Livingston, California in September of 2021. According to Foster Farms, the animals were each worth $8.16, though the defendants still faced up to 6 months in jail if convicted. But unlike most criminal defendants, these 2 ladies welcomed the prosecution. They refused multiple plea deals, including one that came with no jail time and would have eventually cleared the charge from the records. The chickens rescue followed a 2021 hidden camera investigation at the same slaughterhouse, which drew attention to the appalling cruelty of poultry slaughter. When the birds, whom the activists named Ethan and Jax, were removed from the slaughter truck by Alicia and Alexandra, they were both severely ill and they struggled to stand. Now, the defense argued that they weren't breaking the law because Ethan and Jax were in such terrible shape when they arrived at the slaughterhouse that they were unfit for the food supply chain, making them worthless to Foster Farms. Both birds had multiple illnesses, and a veterinarian testified for the defense that Ethan's necropsy showed that he had Enterococcus faecium and E. coli, both multi-drug resistant bacterial infections that can infect and kill humans. Okay, Alexandra, I'm going to stop there. Just in case anyone lives under a rock like I tell you I typically do. I wanted everyone to get up to speed on what happened because some of our listeners may not have heard of this yet. So this podcast, folks, is about the right to rescue. And Alexandra, it's about your story from accused to acquittal.
Wow, Dotsie, thank you. You were a very big part of it because every morning I woke up to a text or an email from you cheering me on. And because you were also part of a panel who every day were watching the court all 9 days of the trial and commenting on it. So in some ways, I think you have a whole different perspective on it, but you know a lot about what happened. So anyway, well, here I am having been acquitted.
I know. Thank goodness. The most exciting thing was that I had you the following Tuesday for podcast recording.
That's right. Jail. That's right. We were able to do the podcast. Whether I was acquitted or not was not as important to me. And sometimes if you lose a trial, especially if it's a trial like ours, which existed because of principle, losing isn't bad because if you can appeal, and I learned this through trial, and I don't know if you talked about it with the lawyers on your panel on Jane Unchained, but if something can be appealed in the Court of Appeals, and then it wins, it sets precedent. And so you mentioned that one of the reasons that we were acquitted of our charges was because the chickens had no value. If you steal something, it has to have value. And that was one argument. The other argument was called mistake of law, which is really the reason we were acquitted. And mistake of law means that we truly believe that what we were doing was lawful. And I still believe that. What I'd like is that for the next trial of animal activists to be about the animals and not about human things, but about the rights of animals to not be tortured. And that's why we try to get in the necessity defense, which is a defense that says that somebody can rescue someone else and break a law in the process. Like I can bust out your window, Dotsie, if you're in there and there's a fire and you need to be rescued. And it wouldn't be considered trespassing or destruction of property. But unfortunately, the judge felt that the word someone, which is in the legal wording, is not an animal, which shocked me actually. But so he would not allow us to have the necessity defense, which is why we use two other defenses: value, did the chickens have value, and mistake of law, which is Alexandra and Alicia truly believed that what we were doing was legal, which is entirely true. And there are several aspects of California law that prohibit the kind of cruelty that Foster Farms imposes on their animals.
What we talked about a lot on the panel of Jane Unchained, and we may mention, I would really like to mention, if y'all out there don't know about the streaming network, Jane Unchained is an app on your phone. It's streaming all day, every day. And you can just download it. And that's where we were covering this trial live. And Jane has a 40-year career in mainstream news in Los Angeles. So she is an extraordinary newswoman. And I felt like I was on CNN because she had a reporter at the courthouse. Every time Alexandra, Alicia, and their attorney Wayne walked out, there was somebody there to interview them. So we were on the panel, right? And Jane's asking interesting questions. She has video footage from anything and everything that's ever had to do with this case. She's showing that. And so it was really well done and highly produced. So that's just a plug because we love our Jane. And
Yes.
She's been on the Switch4Good podcast too. But going back to the necessity plea, which I wanted to get into anyway, and then we're going to back up to the rescue and kind of start people from the beginning. But the necessity plea, which the judge, threw out, as you said, because the chicken doesn't have personhood. One question I never really totally understood was if animals don't have personhood, there is definite precedent that has been set out of court, and I don't know, maybe in court, that it's not a crime to bust open a window of a hot car in a parking lot at a Walmart if somebody sees a dog in there. It would never be put on trial. So that I know that was brought up. And how did the judge consider that? That
law is very specific to the hot car. And so in that way, it did not apply. You can do that for a baby too, and a dog. I would argue that if corporations have personhood, then animals would certainly have personhood, but it has to be set in a court of law. And until there's a judge who allows the necessity defense and for an animal, and that defense is a winning defense, it is not yet enshrined in law, unfortunately. So next time. Next time. It's a continual fight. Yeah. So I guess
corporations have personhood. I mean, I didn't learn this till the trial. Maybe some people don't realize that, like Foster Farms is a person.
Essentially, Foster Farms has the right of freedom of speech like a person. It was a change in the Constitution called Citizens United. That was, I think it was 2005. It was enacted, and it was really about whether corporations could give money to political figures. I think that was the argument, that they could give money just like a person could, and that it was a First Amendment right to express your opinion about who you wanted in office. And because corporations were allowed, they won the case, and they became essentially persons. So they have a lot of the rights of persons. That's essentially the argument that was in the Supreme Court, is that they were persons, so they could exercise their First Amendment rights. It's called Citizens United, maybe the United States. I'm not sure.
Okay, if we wanted to look it up.
Yeah.
In regards to the necessity plea, one more thing. I am curious if, since you didn't get that plea necessity was not considered in this case. The judge ruled for it not to be. The prosecutor compared the chickens to broken down car parts at some point in the trial. Am I right?
Wow. I know he said property of. He asked me a question where he said, you admit that the chickens were property of Foster Farms, right? And I was so taken aback by the word property because I never consider animals that I have in my household my property, that I sort of fumbled on that question. And I said, well, I agree that they were in a Foster Farms truck. And then he said, but they're property. And then I said, yes. And I regret that I didn't say, sir, I'm sorry. I just have a hard time talking about any sentient being my property. But I didn't, because I was on the stand a little nervous. So yeah, I don't remember if he did the car part thing. But he might have. We named the chickens Ethan and Jax, and I remember the prosecutor saying the chickens labeled Ethan and Jax. So they were trying hard not to fall into our narrative of personalizing them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the rescue itself, which I know a little bit about, but not very much, because there's a whole buildup to a rescue like this. So what happened? What was the phone call that you got that said, let's do this? You've done open rescue multiple times. You said you've been arrested a couple of dozen times, and everything has been dropped prior to that. You and Alicia really wanted to press this to court for the reasons that you explained. But how does an open rescue, which DXC is known for, and I don't really know I don't know of any other organizations, right? A lot of it's undercover, which they also do, but this open rescue, what is it? What happens from step one to the actual day you had at Foster Farms?
So I'll tell you what open rescue is, and then I'll explain what happened that day. Open rescue is when animal investigators go into places where there has been claims of abuse or suspicions of abuse, like factory farms, and we document what we see. And if there is an animal who is sick and needs immediate medical care, for whom we have a sanctuary, because it's very hard to find placement for animals, then we will take that animal out of that facility with us. And we do not hide our faces. In fact, the video of myself and Alicia rescuing Ethan and Jax was publicized within the hour on the internet with our names. And the reason we do this is because we believe what we're doing is legal. And we are very sure it's morally right too. And we are pushing back with transparency against the fact that factory farms and these big corporations who abuse animals are not transparent at all. We believe that when we shed a light on what's going on, the court of public opinion, if not the court of law, will agree with us. And so far, that has proven to be correct. And the only reason that people all over the world know what's going on in these places is because of animal investigators documenting, because the corporations themselves won't show you what's going on in factory farms. And the government agencies that are supposed to be protecting animals are not protecting them. And of course, law enforcement doesn't go in and enforce animal cruelty laws either. Whereas they might if it was a hoarding situation with a dog and a cat, if it's a pig or a calf or some kind of a bird that's meant for humans to eat, no, they will not. They just do not go there. So open rescue is really an attempt to push back against that. And that was what we did, Alicia and I. It was a daytime open rescue. Most investigations happen at night, so that we can document and not have people try and stop us from documenting what's behind those closed doors at factory farms. But sometimes I've done several daytime rescues in farms when it just openly taking animals out who are sick in factory farms. So that weekend in September of 2021, I was actually at the Animal Liberation Conference that was run by Direct Action Everywhere. And I was teaching an open rescue class, actually, a seminar, 6-hour class on open rescue and animal investigations. And then we all went to Livingston, California to generally at the end of the Animal Liberation Conference every year, and there's one this year in June, we go to an actual place of abuse that we, in front of which we protest and do sit-ins and all sorts of things. And so we went to the Livingston slaughterhouse in Foster Farm Slaughterhouse that year in 2021.
So when you see the footage of you and Alicia taking Ethan and Jax, it's for those that haven't seen it, it's a gigantic slaughter truck. Definitely hundreds of chickens are on there, maybe thousands. Do you know how many were on that?
5,000 actually.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, just even imagine. So you guys open sort of like the back pin and take what looks like the first 2 chickens you can get a hold of.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a conversation with us because it's not like you went through the truck to like look for who's sick.
Mm-hmm.
Point being, they're all sick. So it didn't. They're all sick. So it's not a lot like you had to find the sick ones, and they're difficult to find. But that kind of brought up the question of, how did you know that they were sick, or how did you know that you were going after these 2 chickens, which you'll answer whether you did or didn't. And what was it about it then doing it during the day? And you could see so clearly, because this conversation came up, that it wasn't like you were headed to Foster Farms to take these 2 specific chickens because you knew they were sick.
So Alicia had showed me the night before footage from this slaughterhouse that showed that the slaughter lines go at 140 birds a minute, and it's overwhelming for the workers there. And they are unable to hang them properly by their feet, which is cruel in itself, but it is standard slaughterhouse procedure, and it is not against the law. Actually, chickens are not covered by the Humane Slaughter Act, although other animals are. Birds are not. But they are hung. There are other laws that protect them. Not very many, but the Poultry Production Inspection Act does protect them somewhat. So what was going on there was definitely against the law from the Poultry Protection Inspection Act, but so the lines go so fast that the chickens are unable to be hung properly. They are often pulled off the line quickly when they look to be dead, but they're not dead. And so they're thrown on the floor, and then dead bodies are covering live animals, and then the live animals suffocate. And when the birds aren't hung properly, then they can't go through the line in the manner that they should. If they miss the blade that is supposed to quickly and cleanly kill them and bleed them out, that means they go into the scalding bath alive. And the scalding bath is supposed to take their feathers off, but if they're still alive, they're boiled alive in that. And that was the horror that's happening inside this slaughterhouse, and probably many, many other slaughterhouses. The government had wanted during COVID to speed up the lines to 175 birds a minute. And they did try that at about 11 slaughterhouses. And I think it did not, it hasn't become, it was not accepted by the USDA, but the companies try. They want these slaughter lines to go as fast as possible. And it's really, really hard for the workers to keep up. So we were at that slaughterhouse, not to specifically protest slaughter, because we could have gone to any slaughterhouse for that, but the inhumane acts happening outside of the normal accepted slaughter at the slaughterhouse.
So you're saving Ethan and Jax from torture. I remember talking to you about this before the trial, right? It wasn't about death, or it couldn't be about death because that was going to be a poor defense, because they'd say it was food for humans, but it was about torture. So it wasn't so much that they were sick. You were saving 2 birds from the torture that they would have been exposed
Well, we
to.
were at that slaughterhouse protesting the torture. And so in terms of the birds, yes, we would have been protecting them from a very likely torturous end. And open rescue involves rescuing sick birds. So we pick sick birds. Now, if you look at the video, you're right. It's very fast. We run up So the prosecution had many criticisms of our rescue, pointing to
Okay.
the fact that it must have been a theft because A, we ran, and B, we pulled out chickens we opened the door and there were chickens and we grabbed them and then we ran back. So if you look at it without knowing what was going on, and then you would think, oh, those people are stealing chickens. But when you understand why, you understand several things. Firstly, yes, I was running. I didn't want foster farms to stop me from rescuing a chicken. It's true, they would have, right? So I still believe it was legal, but they would have tried to stop me. Secondly, I didn't want that truck to move. So I wanted to get there as fast as possible. The taking of the chickens right away is just proof positive that so many chickens, like you said, are sick at these places. We opened the door. Alicia is a very experienced chicken person. She has worked at chicken sanctuaries and dealt with thousands and thousands of chickens, and she has chickens at her own home. I have much less experience, but I have taken care of a chicken whom I rescued for a week. So I have, I've been on these chicken farms quite a bit. So I'm aware of what a sick chicken looks like. And it's easy to tell. Both these chickens did not move away when we opened the cage. Both of them had very pink combs, which is a sign of illness. They had feces covering the bottom of their feathers, showing that they couldn't get up. And so they were sick. And actually, it was proven that they were sick because Ethan, the chicken that Alicia rescued, did die within a couple days. And you've mentioned this before on the show. And I actually hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned it. But these animals who are bred for slaughter, they die when they're still babies. So these chickens were only between 44 and 49 days old. They were just a month and a 6 weeks old. And yet Ethan had the E. coli, the enterococcus. He also had IBV, which is a virus that is basically very, very infectious among birds. It basically
it's like chicken coronavirus that the vet told on the stand, is what she called it anyway.
That's right. Yeah. It is a kind of coronavirus, and it infects 100% of the birds around them if they're around for a long, and kills 60% of them. So it's very lethal and to birds. And so they were definitely sick. So we were able to, in court, the prosecutors thought that they had a trump card because we picked them out so quickly and because we were running. And we basically just told the truth, which is, yeah, we were running. We were running because we didn't want anybody to stop us from rescuing a sick bird. And we could tell they were sick. It was very obvious. And the question really should be not why were you able to take that bird so quickly, but why were we able to find a sick bird so quickly on that slaughter truck? And it was because of what you said. There are so many of them are so sick because of the unnatural conditions in which they're raised for the first 6 weeks of their life.
Right. I mean, we do, have respect for people that don't want to eat veal because they're babies, but sadly, the reality is we only eat babies. Chickens are 45 days old. Pigs are killed around 6 months, and cows around 9 months. So they're all under a year. They're all babies. We're eating babies. So yeah, don't have veal and maybe don't have the rest of it if you have a thing where you don't like to eat babies. But I'm curious about your emotional state. I mean, you're so brave. And I know that we swing that word around with animal rescuers, but I mean, there's a lot at stake. And I am curious as to what's going through your head, and when you got back in the car, right? Because I've seen the video, you get back in the car, the chickens are totally freaked out.
Yeah.
Right. What happens to them then? How are you feeling and how are they feeling?
Well, they've never seen sunlight. They've literally never been outside in their entire lives. So this was the first time outside. It was the first time that anybody carried them the way we carried them. I carried them. The prosecutor actually made a point of noting that I let the chicken's wings flap around, which is true. And I apologized in court that it was my bad that I really didn't hold the chicken properly, and I shouldn't have allowed his wings to flap around. But he was okay. He was the how they carry them in these farms is they grab them by the legs and turn them upside down. That's how they were taken from the barn and put into the slaughter truck. The truck driver who was a witness also for the prosecution, he said the workers grab them, and they basically take maybe 4 chickens in each. They've got to put 5,000 on a truck and they want to do it as fast as possible. They just grab them by their feet, turn them upside down, throw them in the cages. So, what I was doing was not, perfect chicken care, but it was better.
More respect than they'd ever received.
Yeah, exactly. So we took them home and back to where we were staying, and we gave them medications right away. I should say, I say we, but actually it was Alicia, my co-defendant, and Celeste, who was a witness also, who ended up taking them to a sanctuary. But I just documented it because, as I said, we document everything, and I documented their aftercare. So yeah, and Ethan died within a few days. Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
Right. And Jax is living at a sanctuary.
And he has a beautiful, beautiful red comb. And actually, I've talked to a couple jurors since the acquittal, and they said that it was very effective for us to show the difference of the color of the combs in a healthy bird and Jax. My lawyer stopped the video, which I saw so many times. I was just so sick of that video. And showed the pink comb, and you can tell in a second when, if a bird has a pink comb and isn't moving and has feces on it, that's a quick assessment. And you asked me if I was afraid. And the truth is that, Dotsie, I thought, and our whole legal team thought, that Foster Farms is going to drop these or push the DA to drop the charges. After Foster Farms brought the charges, I think, to the DA, then it becomes the district attorney who goes forward, and Foster Farms technically shouldn't have any say, but Foster Farms is the largest employer in Merced County, and we were being tried in Merced. And so we expected them to pressure the DA to drop the charges because no company wants all that we discussed in court to be aired. And so what usually happens is, and this has happened to me, I've been charged often and then nothing happens. And we really thought for this little rescue, which was, not a very graceful rescue, running, it just, that they were going to drop the charges. And I never thought that anything would come of it. Even though, of course, the video was out there, my name was out there, but my name has been out there for the other rescues that I've done. If I've, sometimes I'm behind the camera, so nobody knows that I'm actually there, but, I've been involved in a lot of rescues, and the corporations, they don't want to follow through. They just want to go under the rug.
Yeah, but this one went through.
I know.
And you had to go on the stand. So were you scared? At what point were you like, oh, wow? Or were you just not? Because you told me very clearly 2 days before the jury selection, I'm just a proxy for the chickens. If I go to jail, at least I'll have 3 squares a day and I won't have to sleep in my feces like the chickens do. I mean, that's you. That's
exactly right. As a human being, I have way more rights, then a chicken. And, we were there to give to sort of start the steps of giving more rights to chickens. So yeah, I really did feel I was a proxy. No, I wasn't scared. I was terribly nervous about my testimony. I was so worried that I would say something wrong. And it turns out, actually, from talking to a couple jurors, that actually one thing that I said where I hesitated, they asked me if I was going to the protest that day. And I hesitated because actually I wasn't going to the protest. I was going to save chickens. And ultimately, if there hadn't been a chicken to save, I would have gone to the protest. So I was like a little bit, and that they felt that the jurors, actually, there were two jurors who felt that I was guilty, that I had criminal intent, and that I'm not sure exactly what their thinking was under the law, but they just didn't trust me as much. And and at the very end, there were 12 jurors who wanted to acquit Alicia and only 11 who want to acquit me. And I think it was because of that confusion that I had about whether I was going to the protest. Yeah.
But obviously it has to be unanimous. So that one juror, the other jurors said, come on.
Well, I think it was because ultimately they ended up acquitting us on mistake of law. In the end, I think they were able to show him or her. We had 10 women and 2 men. I guess that I don't know what actually ended up. Maybe just the weight of everything else, and that one little fumble maybe wasn't that strong. But I was kind of shocked. It just shows you how one thing can turn an hour and a half testimony on its head. Just one hesitation. And I should not have worried about trying to be so honest and give all the details, and just said, yes, I was going to go to the protest if there was no chicken to save. But, I just didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're saying you left and went and did this again somewhere else that day?
No.
Chicken?
No, that chicken. If there had been no chicken there to save.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant that instead of that he was asking you if you're going to the protest or not, and you were not going to go to the protest because you were going to go save a chicken. Save
Jack's or whoever that chicken was. That was the reason I was on that location, was at the slaughterhouse, was to see if there were any chickens that were able to be saved
that actual day, because I know there was a protest that after your trial. So I thought you were talking about that.
Oh, yeah. No,
I got it. I'm with you. I'm tracking. I'm Blondie here. Okay. Speaking of the jury, because it's a really interesting journey for a misdemeanor theft trial. It was 3 days of jury selection. I mean, I was like, wow, we're never going to start this case. It was surprising every day. We're still, so like you mentioned, about half of Merced counties are almost is employed by foster farms. So you guys had to, the defense, there's quite a few potential jurors you wanted to kick out because they worked at foster farms. The whole jury selection journey was pretty fascinating. I can only imagine. I wasn't in there, but I would love to hear from you how it went. How did Wayne and Kevin, your and Alicia's attorneys, make decisions on if they wanted a juror or not?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. First of all, jurors are pretty pissed off that they're there anyway. They don't want to be doing jury duty. And when they heard, because they do get a summary of kind of what the trial's about,
okay,
so that they can have an understanding, and that the lawyers can decide whether they have a bias. They ask them questions and things. They were angry that they were there for 2 chickens. They felt that it was a waste of court resources. And it was interesting because they were more angry at foster farms, less at us, maybe because they thought, well, what is this big company doing going against 2 women who took 2 chickens? Because one lady who worked at Walmart or something said, when we have shoplifting at our store, our manager says to ignore it if it's something that's worth under $20. We don't even deal with it. So why are we in court? But
good point.
Gradually, the jurors were told by our lawyer, what would you think if you knew that they posted a video of the removal of these 2 chickens. And then jurors began to be a little more like, oh, what's going on? This is not just a simple, quote unquote, petty theft accusation. And at the end of the trial, the judge did say to that, thanking the jury for their service. He said, I know that a lot of you were very bothered in the beginning about wasting your time over 2 chickens, but I hope that you see that this trial was really about something bigger than that. It was about important principles. And that was really lovely. And apparently they did see that. They did recognize that this was not really about petty theft. Yeah. So that was the first interesting thing. The second interesting thing was I was surprised at how many people they did know of foster farms, because they had friends who'd been at foster farms or they'd worked at foster farms. That excluded them right away if they worked at foster farms. The judge just would let them go. But they also didn't. I thought they'd automatically all be sort of biased towards foster farms, and they weren't actually. Foster farms, I guess, doesn't have the best reputation in that community, even with people who, especially maybe with people who know people who work there.
And that they don't treat the humans very well.
Exactly.
Is that what you mean? Okay, right.
Yeah. And probably there were a couple people who were in voir dire, which is the searching for the 12 jurors and the 2 alternates. The judges have conversations with 18, 20 people at a time. And the rest of the jury's listening, and the rest of the potential jurors are listening, and they ask questions like, do you have animals? What do you think of PETA? All sorts of questions. And there were a couple people who were eliminated of bias because of their strong feelings about corporations, against corporations. And there was a vegan in the bunch, actually, too. he got let go by the judge right away. And then each side, we had 20 options to eliminate people. In other words, we had 20,
right.
That's a lot. And so did the other side. And that was one of the reasons it took 3 full days. And then we also had a day of preliminaries, so that it actually was a 9-day trial, with 4 of them being before opening statements and 5 being the actual trial and deliberation.
You told me, though, that you used all of your challenges, your attorneys, and the prosecution didn't use a single one in terms of the jury selection.
Yeah, I know.
Are they just not prepared? Like that kind of goes into the conversation about the prosecution, that they didn't really come very prepared, and your side was like probably some of the best I've ever seen. And you were in there for the whole thing, but what I've seen, yeah, wow. Wayne.
Well, I think also Alicia and I had 3 attorneys and several lawyers' assistants in our side of the room. And I think people were thinking, why do those 2 women who took 2 chickens have a whole band of an army of attorneys plus supporters in the courtroom, all wearing red armbands? There were about 50 people on the first day of trial. Right. So I think the jurors recognized pretty soon that this was different. And in terms of why the DA did not use their peremptory challenges, meaning did not choose to kick anybody off out of the jury pool, is the judge removed most of the people who had really obvious biases in terms of being vegan or working at foster farms or those kind of things, really having a law enforcement person in your family because there was an officer who was going to be a witness, that kind of thing. They were gone right away. And then we used our 20 to choose and got an excellent jury. It was really, really a thoughtful, educated jury. And the reason that the DA didn't, first, I thought it was so odd too, but then my lawyer, Wayne Shung, explained that Merced had some issues with being accused of, maybe it was racial bias, taking people, there are a lot of folks of Hispanic descent in Merced, and because of all the agricultural work there, and they had been accused of being biased, so they had a policy not to get anybody off the jury. You're not allowed to take anybody off the jury because of race, religion,
Right.
sexuality, gender, those reasons.
So they were just worried that it would be looked at like were doing it for that reason. So they just stayed away from it.
I think they have a policy. So, I mean, that's what I heard. But also, the jury, the prosecution was not prepared. They had a prosecutor who didn't seem to have a lot of experience. He struggled with a stutter, which can really impede you if you're talking in front of a lot of people. And so on the first or second day of actual trial, they brought in a felony prosecutor to take over because the DA's office realized that they were dealing with a very special group. Our side, that we were extremely hardworking, extremely passionate, extremely thorough. We knew of the 179 jurors that went before us, we had teams of people looking them up, finding their Facebook pages, looking to see who they are, so that we would know them better and decide who to choose from. So a lot of work went in our side, and on the prosecution side, they thought it was going to be a slam dunk because they had a video and they had the defendants admitting to it.
Yeah.
So
right. I mean, I have to add, because you wrote to me, and this is the prosecuting attorney for the first couple of days anyway. You said, I personally admire the prosecutor for becoming a trial attorney despite his stutter, because it's pretty nerve-wracking, I would imagine, to get up in front of people and speak as a trial attorney, but to have to deal with that too. And I never told you this, but during the coverage, people can, like comment, and it goes across the screen, right? Everyone's comments. So there's just constant comments the whole time that we're live. And someone said, stupid attorney can't even put his words together. And I thought I was just going to let it go because it's not what this trial was about. But I said, Alexandra would want me to say something. So I said, I'm sorry, I have to say that that attorney, it can put his words together. He has a stutter. And it ended up being kind of a whole band of humans kind of, coming together and saying, we love humans too. Like, this is not, we have to stop this in treating people the way that we do when we're in heated situations like this. So anyway, so a whole turned into just kind of like a whole, just experience for people of like, oh, wow. And there was a lot of respect. And I got to tell you, when you told me that though, my thought was not as nice. And I was like, oh no, he has a stutter. They're going to feel sorry for him and they're going to want to go with his side. So I started looking the other way, like, oh no, this isn't good. And they planted this guy with the stutter because the jury's going to feel bad for him. But anyway, so they did.
No, his stutter was very hard in terms of communication. Right. And so I think he tended to cut things short. So he didn't have the involved, deep conversation with the jury, certainly in jury selection and opening statements. And I think that hurt him. For me, the prosecution is the same as the workers, as law enforcement. I don't see them as adversaries. I see them as doing their job, and I'm doing my job. And, we should all be kind and respectful to each other, even if we don't agree on some basic principles. We have to be kind and respectful. So I never had animosity towards the prosecutor, except at the very end when the federal prosecutor pulled a really dirty trick during closing statements. And then I was mad, and I couldn't rebut because it was closing statements. And I don't know, Dotsie, if you heard about this, but in closing statements, you're not supposed to introduce new evidence, right?
Right.
Because no witnesses can be called again. So what did this prosecutor do? In his closing statements, and the judge allowed him, and I don't know why, and maybe I'm missing some subtlety of the law. He had taken still shots of the video, which we had talked about for the last 4 days, if you count it, 9 days, if you count the whole trial, right? And he'd blown up pictures, and he introduced evidence that I had bolt cutters in my my backpack, which I did, by the way, and it was totally fine about being asked about them on the stand,
Right.
but
You
he
could see them
never
in the
asked
video.
about them. Yeah, you
Right.
could see them in the video. They were so obvious. He never asked me about them, but he brings them up at the very end, calls them, and I would have said, yeah, I had them, because sometimes these cages are, they're kept closed by these fabric sort of, straps.
Yeah.
And I was going to cut them. And you know what? Truthfully, that large bolt cutter was all that I had. I mean, I just didn't have a more dainty tool to
Right.
do it. So that's what I had. It was very unwieldy and I didn't use it. But anyway, so he blew that up and introduced that new line of questioning, which I couldn't discuss with him. And then he also blew up a picture of the driver of our car that we got into after we rescued the chickens, which happened to be one of our witnesses. He had never, and it was a fuzzy picture. It was Celeste, but she wasn't he made her sound like the getaway driver. And by doing that, he tried to make it sound like we were trying to hide her, which if she'd been asked, she would have said, yeah, I drove the car. That's how I was able to take care of the chickens right away. I was there.
Right.
But
right.
It was
Oh.
it was infuriating. I was not happy about that.
I remember Wayne coming out of the courtroom and said they pulled a real sly one in closing, but we didn't know what it was. Because of course he couldn't say that at that point.
Okay.
But
yeah. I think you can't, I mean, it's unfair because with all the doctoring that people can do with photographs, I mean, and I didn't see the photographs close enough because he was showing it to the jury, but to bring in this evidence, it made it sound like Celeste was some kind of, aider and abetter, when she would have said, yes, I did drive the car.
Right. Right.
And I would have said, yeah, I call them rescue tools. You might call them burglary tools, but yes, I did have it because of this strap that sometimes keeps the cages closed. I would have snipped it if I needed to, because there was a sick chicken inside. But having not been able to say that made us sound very nefarious. I mean, obviously it didn't work in the end, but it felt horribly unfair. Having said that, we had quite a fair judge. We were very lucky to get Judge Paul Lowe. He was a fair judge, and he was a little tough on us, I think. But maybe everybody thinks that. The judges.
Yeah, probably. I would have. That's a good point. So, so it as it relates to a right to rescue, because that's the precedent that we're speaking about, that has been set, is being set. Your and Alicia's victory comes after a really historic trial last October, in which DSE activists, one of them, Wayne Chung, were acquitted by a Utah jury after facing a decade in prison. This was a felony, right? That they were charged with, for rescuing 2 sick, dying piglets, which were said to be worth $42 each from Smithfield Foods. And so it feels like more and more of DXC's rescues are making their way to trial, finally, right? And I think I read that 2 more cases. Or what'd you say?
Yeah, there are more. There are several cases coming up this year.
Right. There's a couple more. Right. This right to rescue I mean, activists, people like you facing jail, prison, are convincing juries that you have a right to rescue. Now we have 2 instances. So what does that mean? How does it make you, that's what you did this for?
Yeah, I really felt it was important. We were offered, I think it was 5 plea deals before this that didn't involve jail time, that involved like a fine of $45, I think. And then, I don't think there was, I don't remember if there was a fine, but there was you don't come back to Merced for a year and, do 45 hours of community service. I think that was maybe the last one I got. And, we just turned them down because we felt it was so important that the chickens be heard in court, that we have to do that to advance animal rights. This case, I think this case had to do more with us than the actual chickens' rights, which I wish that it's great that we got acquitted, but we got acquitted because it was called mistake of law. The humans didn't realize that they were, they felt that they were doing the right thing. So it was all about the humans, right? Mm. And Wayne and Paul Picklesheimer, who won in Utah, the case that you mentioned, they won on value, arguing that the piglets had no value to foster farms, therefore it couldn't be considered a felony. What we want ultimately,
because they
these
were
are
so
important.
sick, the pigs, is that why they had no value?
They were so sick, exactly. They were
Okay.
so little, they wouldn't have survived. And that's a very interesting case, actually. People should definitely go back and look at that. If you go to Direct Action Everywhere, you could find some accounts of that case. But we need to get some wins based on animals' rights.
Yeah.
Like that they have a right to be rescued because of necessity, for example. And I'm sure and that there be laws on the books that really do protect livestock. Because if you or I treated a cat or a dog the way that Foster Farms treats its chickens, and the way Land O'Lakes treats its calves, and the way that Smithfield treats its pigs, oh my God, we would be in jail for animal cruelty.
Yeah.
So most states have exemptions for livestock in their cruelty laws, unfortunately. So they really aren't protected. California has an exemption, which is why we're the strongest state to start testing the right to the rescue, is that they have some protections for livestock. And so that's what I hope to see. And I think that a couple of the upcoming cases are going to be stronger in terms of the right to rescue and the animals being, having rights. And maybe being able to use the necessity defense.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I hope.
Yes, and for all beings, right? And we were talking about on the panel how we even separate species, right? So right, if this had been a dog or a cat, it would have been a no-brainer, right? Like, it wouldn't even have happened. But even if it had been a macaw or a parrot, right? So just another kind of bird of the same species, but these are chickens. So it's like we're close. I think we're close.
People say to me, and they probably say to you too, they say, well, they're bred to be eaten. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that doesn't take away their sentience, right, their feelings, their needs, their instincts. In fact, it's actually worse, because especially birds like this, Cornish cross, they are bred to get so big so soon. That's one of the reasons that they can't stand up, because their bodies are so big. They get terrible problems, physical problems. They crave food all the time, which is why it was so odd that our birds whom we rescued did not eat very much at all after we rescued them. That is very unusual for a Cornish cross, and was part of our explanation of how we knew they were sick, is that they didn't really eat much. So these hens they're bred to be eaten by us, but that doesn't make them any less sentient. It just makes them actually more suffering in their short lives.
Yeah. I mean, if we could read all of that out, right, then there just would be that's not a way we're going to go. But I mean, no, stop it.
Just stop.
Yeah. Right.
Stop.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even know this, Dotsie, but chickens aren't supposed to lay eggs every day. That is not healthy. I didn't know that until I became involved with the animal rights movement. I thought, oh, they just lay them every day. It's fine for us to eat them. Well, no, this is a real reason why we shouldn't be eating chickens' eggs, is that they are being bred to give us eggs every day, and they sap their own bones of calcium in an effort to make shells every day. I mean, totally unnatural.
Yeah. Besides the not eating chicken ovulation, people like to say it's chicken period. It's not chicken ovulation, which is even a little bit grosser if you really look at what ovulation is. Like,
we should know.
No. I had when we knew the verdict, You texted me like 5 seconds before it kind of came screaming out of the courtroom.
I texted you as soon as I heard. I was like,
my God.
and I was trembling. So I was like,
Yeah, I can't even fathom, because that's on the panel. We were, by this, the panel started as 6 of us. And by the end, it was 10 of us, which is the max that you can have on the StreamYard. So she kept having to kick people off because everyone was so into it. But when we found out, we were very unprofessional and un-CNN like, because all 10 of us burst into tears. And I mean, like, sobbing tears. Where it was like, who's going to say something? Because it was just so incredible. And I don't know what in the world, why, but Neil Armstrong pops into my mind. I get this vision of the moon and this person standing on the moon. And in my head, I said, Neil ain't got nothing on Alexandra and Alicia, because I felt like I got to live in this moment that is going to go down in history books, is now in history books, because it did happen. And it was another giant step towards animal liberation. And this will be one of those big moments that we remember. And it was a historical moment, but it was also, it felt like a call to action, right? For all of us on the panel and watching, because all of us are in this work, to just never stop fighting, no matter how hard it gets, right? And let this verdict serve as fuel, right? Whatever activism you do out there. And that's to our listeners too. And whatever your force field of power is, change is happening.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. And you get the last word, because now I'm crying again.
Well, I just want to thank you, Dotsie, for your support. And I remember that I told you asked me what was a memory from the day of trial. And I wrote to you and I said, there were so many times when the lawyers would have to go up in front of the judge and they'd be all talking and arguing about whatever. And I would look from the defense table and I would see these 6 lawyers in suits in front of a judge talking about chickens. And I thought, no matter what, we've come so far. Ethan and Jax are just, as you said, they're a microcosm of all the chickens that are out there and all the chickens that are going to be bred in the next years. And they represent them. But you and I, we represent Ethan and Jax, and we're humans, and we can get inside a court of law and start speaking for these chickens and arguing. And soon, I hope, with there are people really trying to get animals into a court of law themselves and have the habeas corpus to be able their autonomy to be able to be represented in court without having to have human proxies like Alicia and I fight for them. That's what we were aiming for. And all sorts of different activism is helpful towards that, because it normalizes the fact that we believe that animals have the rights of persons. Like personhood. If a corporation like Foster Farms can have personhood, why can't those chickens have personhood? And I think we'll get there.
I do too. With you on the job, we're definitely there. Thanks for sharing this with our audience.
Thanks for wanting to interview me about it, Dotsie. I really appreciate it.
Love you. You're amazing. Bye, everyone. Next time, we'll see you. Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switch4good.org. That's podcast@switch4good.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.